Well, welcome. Tonight we're going to talk about a board that shouldn't be necessary because we all can read. We should be able to look at, do we meet the codes or not? But yet it becomes critical that we have somebody watching over what we're accepting in Milford. Is that a safe bet?
Yeah, I think at its basic point, it certainly there's a lot of it that is meeting the existing requirements of the town of Milford, and going forward with that, the board obviously provides input into how people should meet that. But at the end of the day, we have a set of regulations that need to be followed in order for projects to move forward in the town.
So let's start with an introduction. The planning board, and why don't you introduce yourself?
I'm Joe Calagione. This year, as of April, I'm chairman of the planning board. The planning board is a 5-member board in Milford. The planning board is traditionally rotated chairman. Every year we change chairman, and the person that's up for election come the following April is normally the chairman. So I'm serving as chairman of the planning board this year. I've been on the board, I guess it's 18 years now, I believe. So I've been serving on the board. It's something that is critical to the town and is required by law. Really, I mean, there's certain things that the state of Massachusetts requires that the planning board has to go through and has to review. Subdivision control laws. Zoning board, we have a certain amount of time that we have to review things, and we have to send recommendations, or we have to approve plans. So there's a whole bunch of things that the planning board needs to do in its normal course of meetings, and we meet usually twice a month. During the summer, we'll usually meet once a month during the summer months, but otherwise we're meeting twice a month. Lately, the agenda has been probably a little more heavy than it was over the past couple of years, as there's been some new development stuff going on and things. But we've had ebbs and flows over the years.
But now it's 5-member board.
Yep.
That's elected. I mean,
Yes.
I think most people assume it's appointed.
Yeah. No, the planning board is elected. There's a member that's up for re-election every year, which is different than the zoning board. A lot of times people get planning board.
Well, I want to
zoning
go
board
through that because they
changed.
don't understand. But so when you go for, it's a 5-year term?
Yes.
So one out of every 5
Yes.
every year.
Yep.
And that person, like the selectman, serves as chairman for the year that they're going for election.
Yes. That's the way we've traditionally done it. There's been some give and take on that. Sometimes members don't feel like being chairman. There may be an issue with whether they're going to be able to do that or not, and have passed it on to someone else. But in general, that's what we've done since I've been on the board.
So now, the planning board, required by law. Mm-hmm. Thank God somebody's watching. Mm-hmm. But if all went perfectly, we shouldn't need a planning board, right? We can read the zoning articles.
Well, I think the first thing that we need to look at, though, is the planning board serves as, maybe we want to call it the gatekeeper of the zoning bylaws of the town of Milford. For there to be a change to the zoning bylaws in the town of Milford, anybody can bring that forward. The selectmen can remand that article to the planning board. The planning board by law is required to have a public meeting on any change to any zoning bylaws in the town of Milford that are going to go forward to town meeting. So as you know, you've been at town meeting. There's always that speech from a member of the planning board as required by Massachusetts general law. And that is what's required. And we do have a public hearing for every one of those. And if people want to speak on those, they come before us, present their opinions, and then the board, as a 5-member board, gives a recommendation to town meeting. At the end of the day, it's town meeting's decision as to how they want to change the bylaws.
But Joe, what comes before the planning board? Because I think of planning as future and existing. So why would I come before the planning board?
If you would come before the planning board if you wanted to make a change to the zoning bylaws of the town of Milford. Just at the recent town meeting, there were 2 zoning amendments that were citizen petitions. Effectively, the citizen
Dairy
petition.
Queen.
Dairy Queen was one of them. The Lober at Middle School East was effectively a citizen petition, is the way those started. So if you felt that there was there was an opportunity that you felt the zoning bylaws of the town of Milford should be changed, either for your benefit as a person or for the town's benefit, however it is, you would end up coming before the planning board to make a presentation so that we could then give a recommendation to town meeting.
So it's not, if I'm building a house
Yep.
and I'm reading it and I'm well within all the regulations,
Yep.
do I have to go in front of the planning board?
Probably not. If you have an existing lot and it's already been approved as a subdivision lot, it's been subdivided, or it was an existing lot, it meets all the requirements, no, you go to the building department, you get a building permit, and you go and build your house. You wouldn't come before us. Site plan is specifically, and I think that's what you're alluding to, is if you're building a commercial building, any of those types of things, industrial building, you would need to come before the planning board in order to get site plan approval. But a single building lot does not require site plan approval.
So as a resident, a homeowner, if I own dirt and I'm going to build a house,
You may never see us.
I'm going to the building inspector.
Yes.
He's going to say, or she's going to say, yes, you meet codes.
Yep.
We go ahead.
Correct. And if you don't and you think there's a hardship, and this gets into the zoning, the zoning board of appeals, and it's always important to say that because they are a zoning board of appeals, not the zoning board, is that, let's say you wanted to build a house and you felt you couldn't put that house, the side yard setback was 15 feet, and you couldn't put that house 15 feet from the side, you wanted it to be closer. The process to do that is you would file an appeal with the zoning board of appeals. As part of that, the planning board also gives a recommendation to the zoning board of appeals. We don't make the final decision. We hold a hearing ourselves. It's not a public. It's our hearing to then make a recommendation to the zoning board of appeals. But that would be the only way that as a homeowner you may come before us.
I remember when there was a builder, and somehow I guess his eyesight was wrong, because all of a sudden people in our neighborhood went to build their driveway and found out that the way the driveway was angled, they were going to cut through the neighbor's property. So they can't build a driveway without somehow transporting their cars over the last 20 feet.
Yeah.
So I'm not really asking for a change in the bylaw. So I wouldn't go to you, right?
No, you probably would, because the normal mechanism to relieve that would be, I would assume, and I don't know the exact condition, would be what's called an 81P, which is effectively how we create lots. When we take a large subdivision of land and we create lots, in order to change that boundary line so that the driveway is now in that property, you need to come before the planning board with an 81P plan that officially changes that lot line so that the driveway is now within your property.
See, I ran into that when I was building my house. And they said because of the setback, which to me is how close I can come to my property line,
Yep.
my house was too wide for the lot. So they had to do kind of like a bulge. I don't know how the builder got it done or where, or
He probably, chances are what happened is normal course of events is that, when we see this a lot, is the developer comes in with a set of property lines. And we approve the subdivision as a whole. Then people come in and buy the lots. They want to do this house or that house. They want this type of house or whatever.
so my house was a little wider
Than what he would have, yeah. So the only way for him
lot.
to do that is to come back to us, change that lot line that was created when he did the subdivision itself by an 81P plan to then allow for that house to be constructed.
So the 81P is kind of saying we don't want to change the zoning bylaw. We just want an exception.
No, you're not changing the zoning bylaw. All you're doing is changing a lot line. You're going back and changing a lot line. It still would need to meet all the requirements of the town. There's nothing that says that the only lot line is this one that was shown originally. It said this is where the builder wanted it to be when he did his subdivision.
Well, you got it approved straight,
Yeah.
X feet wide. Now we need it a little wider at the top.
Yeah, and one of the issues that has happened along the way, and this probably happened at your subdivision, is that the bylaw has changed slightly since when that subdivision was originally approved. One of the things that we did, because what we were seeing was the creation of a lot of strange-shaped lots, shall we say. Is that going forward, we require the developers, when they came forward, to have, through mathematical manipulation, which I don't think we want to get into here, but effectively, it makes for a more square lot. You can't have these long entrance roads within a big bulb at the end, or this big bulb at the end with a narrow section and then meeting the frontage up front.
A dumbbell.
Yeah, those won't meet the requirements anymore the way the bylaw is. So the issue becomes, as you go forward, you're effectively bound by the time that you do these. When they did them, they were existing, they met all the requirements that were there at the time. When you come forward now, if you want to make a change, they need to meet the new requirements in order for you to be able to do that.
Now, how do you decide on what's required? I mean, I've heard towns next to us that say this is a minimum 2 acres or 3 acres because it limits how many houses you can build.
Right. I mean, that's somewhat tough for me because you can go back to, the late 50s, I guess it was, 60s, when zoning and zoning districts were created in the town of Milford. Part of it is a relationship to what was there. We have what we call the residential A district. Downtown, close to downtown, that's very small lot areas. It was the areas that we allowed duplexes in because a lot of those existed. So you try to meld your original zoning into what was there. If you look at what was traditionally, what we have is the RD, almost 2 acre zoning. That was in an area that wasn't sewered and effectively was in the watershed of the Milford Water Company. So we were trying to protect the water company.
We have 2 acre lot minimums?
Yeah, out at along 85, as a matter of fact.
On the way to Echo Lake.
Yep, in and around the water. Those were specifically zoned that way to minimize the impact, because the thought was that those would have to be septic at the time, to minimize the impact to the water company. So it's a, as you go away from the central business core, central commercial core, you tend to end up slowly increasing your lot size. The magic number, I don't know that there's anything per se. Again, we looked at when I think it was originally set up, and obviously I wasn't there, but I think they looked at what the sizes
Well, don't
were.
look at me when you say that. I wasn't there either. I'm not that old.
Well, both of us were in town when it happened, actually, but I don't think either one of us would have any understanding of it back then. I think that's how the zoning districts were originally thought and originally how they set up. So I mean, we end up going from 8,000 to, as I said, the RD zones being the biggest, 15,000 we have, and then we have RC and is 40,000. Normally considered a builder's acre. Other towns go with straight 1 acre zoning, but those are the normal requirements. I think the thing with Milford, as an engineering background, it's sort of, and I was someone that prepared plans in the town of Milford before I ever became a member of the planning board. I worked in town and then got on the planning board. I think the more interesting thing, and I can go around town and look and see, is the progression of roadway design in the town of Milford.
You mean like granite curbs?
Exactly. Granite
we
curbs.
made a horrible
curb.
mistake in my neighborhood when we didn't demand that they stick to the original, because was it Cape Cod berm?
At one point in time, At one point in time, there was no berm. If you go to my neighborhood, there's no curb whatsoever. It's just straight to the.
But Scotty took care of that in our neighborhood. 3 years later, the Cape Cod berm went to flat.
Yes.
I mean, not that he can do anything.
And that was certainly a realization of this board. Now, that's one of the things that we did change is that we've. Not only have we eliminated the Cape Cod berm, the next step was that we did have a requirement for straight granite, but most of the time a waiver was requested from the developer to put in sloped granite, which the planning board originally did. We've now gotten away from that because...
What is straight granite versus sloped granite?
Straight granite is effectively straight granite. If you go out and look at straight granite face, if you see the roadway comes in, the granite curb looks like this. Sloped granite is effectively you take and you slope that granite piece back, and it's it's not as big or a heavy a piece of granite. It's much easier to set. It also tends to, it's cheaper. It's cheaper to do, but it doesn't hold up as well. It holds up certainly better than Cape Cod berm. It doesn't hold up as well as straight granite. And the feeling of the board was that, we're seeing a lot of cases where Scotty has to go and fix these, or it doesn't get fixed, and we just felt that with the cost of lots in the town of Milford and stuff, that we saw no reason that the developer couldn't put those in.
I mean, come on, Joe. When we grew up, if you ever thought of $500,000, you could have bought Milford for $500,000. They would have thrown in Hopedale.
Yeah.
I mean, today I'm seeing houses in Milford, $600,000-700,000 each.
Yep.
There's got to be enough money there in the builder's margin to put in a proper granite curbing.
Yeah. I mean, the issue we have now is that Milford is pretty close to being land poor. I mean, there isn't much left to develop.
I mean, you got the new Lobusser on Whitewood. Mm-hmm. Are there any other? I mean, maybe Bear Hill. Is there areas up there? Or?
Well, Dominic Afonso has his section that's just been approved for his new condominium that effectively connects Casey Drive in. So that's gone. I think there may be a few smaller parcels still available up there, but there's very little undeveloped land in Milford. The other 40B down at 16, the Rob Sam property, which was part of the old casino setup, is in front of the zoning board for the 40B.
The 40B. Mm-hmm. I mean, I don't want to be cold, but isn't that a way of me walking in saying to the planning board? I'm going to do what I want.
Well, the thing that's in it's state law. It's got nothing to do with nothing that we can do. Is the zoning board is actually we only give recommendations to the zoning board for a 40B. That's our only
But if I want
mechanism.
If I want to challenge the ruling of the zoning board, who do I challenge it to? The board that the state set up to promote 40B?
Effectively.
So my job is to promote 40B housing. Mm-hmm. And I'm the judge and jury, the final Supreme Court of zoning on 40B housing.
Well, not that I want to be a lawyer on it. I'm not positive of the. I mean, I'm sure that there's a land court case that could go to is part of this. But certainly, I mean, the original, when somebody comes up with the idea that they want to do a 40B, that's sent to the state 40B board.
40B commission.
Right. So that's the first step, and then we go from there. The planning board again is a board. The zoning board will ask us for comments.
But that's got to be really tough. Do I want to say yes to what I was appointed to say yes to? Okay, hard decision.
Yeah, I mean, I think, and again, I don't sit in those chairs, but I think that obviously they're there to promote affordable housing, and I think that they, as part of their job description, need to go out of their way to promote that. And in terms of what the impacts may or may not be to the town, those take somewhat of a second seat in those situations.
I know a lot of people get upset. They call it snobbery or whatever, but it seems like years ago when I asked Paul Abadanza, mm-hmm. What does it cost us for every dollar that we bring in on housing, real estate tax? And he told me it's probably about $1.80 in services. Mm-hmm. And it stunned me until I thought about, wait a minute, the average kid is $9,800 in school. The state pays less than half of that. Mm-hmm. And the average house in Milford is $4,900 in taxes. So if you have one kid for more than, whatever it is, 12 years, this town loses money on every house that comes in.
Yeah. I mean, it's something that, and again, we as a planning board can only do a certain amount of things, but this board has been extremely active in trying to balance the residential, which, at the end of the day, you still need. I mean, it is the community, and the industrial commercial base, and trying to make sure that there's a shift to those areas, and to try to minimize the impact to the school system as much as possible. You can only do so much, but the board has been cognizant of that and has done zoning changes that we've recommended that we felt would promote that to some extent.
But what can you really do? I mean, you're bound by the zoning laws.
Yep.
So if I meet the laws, what can you say to me?
we're also the board that in general is the board that takes and makes recommendations to change to the zoning bylaw. So we look at those and look at what can we possibly do to try to enhance development in the town of Milford. What are things that are within what we feel the town would be comfortable with, but also enhance development so developers want to come to Milford, so that they want to take parcels to do that and to not not do 40B or other types of things.
At the end of the day, when you think of what you all did for Fortune Boulevard, thank God.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you start thinking whoever had the foresight to zone that right
Yep.
is really, I mean, even the hotels,
The hotels are a big money maker for the town of Milford.
$1 million a year with no expense.
Yeah.
You know, because hotels don't have kids. Well, that saves 62% for school.
Yeah.
They do their own trash. They do their own services. So that's a wonderful
Yeah.
zoning change whenever that was done.
Yeah, and we did what we thought was a similar type thing when we did the business park zoning for the property down further on Deer Road. Unfortunately, part of that is now looking at a possible 40B in there, and we're losing some of that, but there's still the possibility of developing that in a business park zone, which allows for the type of things that we felt were higher margin taxes. Not necessarily industrial, but more commercial, more.
But
more
still,
square
Joe,
footage in
commercial
there.
is 18 cents it cost me for every dollar. The industrial I like even better, it's 16 cents.
Yeah.
So I make a lot of money that I can offset the residential.
Yep.
And I mean, that's when people ask, how is it that Milford, with all the services we provide, hasn't, what is it, 4,900 average tax bill? It's much lower than anybody. A lot of it is because of the industrial and commercial.
Yep. Yeah. And again, this board has been very, very cognizant and active to make sure that stays that way. I mean, especially as we continue down the path of being land poor. I don't know that it'll be in my lifetime, but we're getting close to that. We end up with a situation where, we look at and we're going to be bound by 2.5. If you don't do higher and better, then you can only raise your taxes by 2.5. If there's no new development, then you're not getting a bigger stake.
Yeah,
so
and
we're looking at, again, how can we have, because now we don't have the land, how can we have developers want to redevelop in Milford and do bigger and better things? And those are the types of issues that going forward that are going to become more
And we
critical
don't
to the
allow
board.
that profanity in the town hall. Words like 2.5 or debt exclusion are as profane as I can think of, so we don't want to even think about them.
Yeah, but you need to be cognizant of it, because otherwise it just hits the wall at some
Thank
point.
God for
Otherwise,
the department heads here, because they really do care about Milford as a town. Because if it wasn't for them understanding and squeezing and leveraging everything they can, we wouldn't have had our 13th surplus in a row.
yeah.
But now, you say we're getting land poor. Do we really have much land left? Is it
No,
over
like
2%, 1% of Milford that is still open to development?
It might. I don't know. The last time we looked at it, it may be between 5 and 10. But you got to also look at the fact that that's a generalized number. Are those parcels even accessible? I mean, there's parcels that are open space that were, again, part of the casino, that would have tied together, that in separate parcels, if you're just looking at developing one, you now can't get to the back one anymore. So the only way to get to that is if a developer goes through and does something on 16 and ties in a parcel in the back, or if they're on the other side at 85. So there are parcels like that. So in a general sense, we may have between 5 and 10. How much is developable with all the 340Bs and the other property right now? Once we get through the next couple of years, it's probably going to be very, very slow.
340Bs?
There's 3.
3 of them.
Yes.
3 of them.
Yes. Yeah, there's the one off of Industrial Road, there's the one at the Robsham property, and there's the one off of Deer Street.
Now, do you know off the top of your head how many homes that brings in?
Well,
you could look it up.
Yeah, I'm not sure
But it's
exactly
not
what
a
the number.
trivial amount.
No, it's extensive, and the problem is now with 40B is that also the requirement is that 10% of the units have to be 3-bedroom, which traditionally in an apartment,
Those
condo
are the
setup in
killers.
Milford, those are the ones that people aren't going to be in there probably unless they have children. So those
The
those
1
add
and
more
2
ones.
bedroom, I love.
Yeah, they're usually
They're
neutral.
old people or very young people.
Yeah.
But the 3 and 4 bedrooms, gulp.
Yeah, there are no 4 bedrooms in any of them, but 3 bedrooms. 10% of them have to be 3-bedroom. So there probably will be some influx of students into the system if they all get approved. The thing is, if they all get approved, I believe Milford would actually at that point in time
we over
be
the
over the
9%?
requirements. With those, if those 3 were approved, we'd be over the requirement, and during this period at least, we wouldn't be subject to any more 40Bs.
So should I feel great that we're finally going to be over the choking minimum when we have no land to develop?
Yeah, there's always although that doesn't mean that somebody couldn't redevelop something as a 40B later on, depending on what they want to do.
Okay.
So you always have that situation. So it doesn't necessarily go away. And again, not to be snobbish or anything, I'm not saying that 40B is bad. I think we just need to make sure that we do it right and we allow for certain things.
What worries me on the 40B is that you're basically, and I make fun of saying I'm snubbing my nose at the planning board, but I am. I come in and I say, oh, I'm not going to put in a sewer. I'll do my own water treatment plant. Would you normally allow that?
No.
So now we're hoping that in 20 years, 30 years, if that plant goes bad, because one of the 40Bs is going to have their own little water treatment plant. If that goes bad, who are they coming after? The developer may be long gone by then.
Well, I believe that the context, at least of that one, is that in fact it would be whoever owns the property, because those are not separate
Right.
ownerships. It's whether it be the developer or the owner at that time. It's their system. It's they would need to do whatever
And when
they
they
would
sit
need
there
to
and
do.
say, I have no money, Joe, you're going to turn your back on 30, 40 families?
I don't know that the town would have any choice, to be totally honest.
That's my point. At the end of the day, they come back and they say, we can't afford to tie into the sewer system. Okay, so we're going to put our own little treatment plant. I've never seen Milford turn its back on its own. So 30, 40 years from now, if that goes bad, we're going to pay for it.
Yeah, I think most of, anything could possibly happen, but I think most of those systems that go in are relatively stable systems. The system, obviously, just like the system in Milford, would need to be upgraded and stuff, and however they set that up. But I can't foresee. That's the same type of situation that septic systems in one section of the town could go bad. What do you do?
Isn't that what we said about Fisk Mill? And now all of a sudden you got the sewer commission having to do major upgrades because it didn't quite pan out the way they hoped?
Yeah, there's been issues certainly up there. Again, that goes back to the sewer board to a certain extent in terms of what was
And
done or
God
not
bless,
done.
there's 8 years in a row that they haven't raised the sewer rates, which is amazing to me.
Yeah.
But, you still start looking at some of the bylaws really make a lot of sense. And giving people the right to ignore them always worries me.
Yeah, I guess that's I understand where the state originally came from. There was certainly an issue, and there still is an issue today in terms of affordable housing. As to whether the law is correct the way it's written or not, I guess everybody can have an opinion on whether they want to do it that way or not.
Well, I can see the whole anti-snobbery thing, but it worries me that, okay, we're going to pick up a bill someday that's going to be significant.
Yep.
Yeah. Now, I go to you if I want to change a lot line. What does the ZBA do then?
The ZBA effectively is, if we have our existing zoning bylaw, it says you need to do you need to have this, 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 or this. The most common one for the ZBA is somebody wants to put an addition on their house. They decide they want a 2-car garage. Between the edge of their building and the lot line is 30 feet. 2-car garage, normally 24 feet wide. That leaves them 6 feet. The requirement in the zone, let's say, is 10 feet for a side yard. Can't fit it. That doesn't meet zoning. They can't go to the building department and get a building permit. They need to get a zoning variance. They need to prove a hardship, is the way the law reads, in hardship is, that's all it says. So whatever you feel the hardship is, and whatever the
I'm
zoning
going to
board
go
feels.
in and say, my ungrateful offspring number one doesn't want to be out in the cold with her car now that she's 16. It's a hardship if I have to listen to her.
You can do whatever you feel in terms of what the hardship may or may not be. But
what is typical? I mean, seriously, do I need a 2-car garage?
Some people will tell you yes.
Well,
the zoning, the planning board has recently probably been on the side of, okay, you need this, but show some form of, we think you should make it smaller or whatever. The zoning board has their own rules and regulations, and I don't want to speak for them as to what they see or not see. So the planning board, when they give a recommendation, a lot of times you'll see our recommendation saying, we think you should make the garage instead of 24, 22 feet wide or something.
Cut it back 2 feet so you leave a little room.
So you leave a little more room, so it more matches perhaps what's out there or whatever. We've tended to do that. Whether the zoning board wants to follow that or not is entirely their choice. But that's why you go to a zoning board, is if you can't meet the requirements of the zoning bylaw of the town of Milford, you need to go to the zoning board. We get involved only because we need to, as part of that process, give a recommendation to the zoning board, but we are not the final say on any of those issues.
The ZBA is the final.
The ZBA is the final say. The other issue with the zoning board, in terms of if you're going to go to the zoning board, is that if you have a site plan that for certain things, and there's a whole bunch of them that we could go through. I don't know. Let's just pick assisted living facility. You need to not only get a site plan approval, but you need to get a special permit. And the zoning board may be, for certain items, the grantor of that special permit. So you have to go before them and say, I want to put this use in this zone. It requires a special permit from you. Is it okay to do that? We, the planning board, also have certain things, depending on what you're doing, that you would come to the planning board for that special permit. Once you get the special permit, you then have to come back to the planning board to get a site plan approval. But the first step is to get the special permit to allow for the use. Then you need to meet the requirements of the town in terms of setback, access, and
I
all
want
those
to
sorts of things.
do something. I want to add a solarium. I want to add another car garage. Mm-hmm. I go to you first, lay it out, and say, this is what I want to do. Or do I go to the ZBA
You
first?
go to the ZBA, they will, as part of the process, it gets sent to us, but the request goes to the zoning board. I want a zoning variance for X.
I don't want to change the bylaw. I just want special
dispensation. Yeah, effectively.
So at the town meeting, I mean, one of the things that you look at the planning board, very rarely have I seen controversy. The good Dr. Kennelly gets up and says, we held a duly held meeting, and we had every dog, cat, and other resident in the neighborhood show up, and everybody loves it, so let's go forward. It seems like it flies.
I think in most cases, for those especially that the planning board themselves are presenting the zoning change, it's something that the planning board as a group has discussed. We've had town planner write the zoning amendment. So in most cases, not all of them, but in most cases, it's an agreement between all the board members that we want to go forward with that. So when we finally have the public hearing, it's anticlimactic for those purposes. But that may not be the case certainly with citizen petitions. And some of the ones that we may do.
But now you got a town planner, and you got a planning board.
Yep.
Okay, why do I need a town planner if I have a planning board?
Effectively, the town planner is the expert, the person that we go to. I have an engineering background, but certainly other members of the board don't.
And you only have 18 years experience. I mean,
yeah. But I mean, the purpose of specifically the town planner is certainly his knowledge of of zoning amendments in how to change the zoning bylaw such that it keeps the article as a whole together, but still has certain sections, because you go back and forth with references to other sections and stuff, and if you're not intimately familiar with that document, you end up with something that doesn't really work well, and you get into this section and it doesn't match what you had in this section. So he goes through and is the person that we deal with in terms of drawing up those changes that we want to make. And making sure that they fit within the context of the bylaw. He's also the person that, in doing reviews that come before us, make sure that people, they said it's in this zone, they said it can only be this many square feet, you need this many parking spaces. He goes through and makes those checks. The town engineer will go through and make checks with, going through the whole drainage calculations that are submitted, and we look to them to go through all those things, go through the traffic data, and make sure that those all make sense, so that they make a recommendation to us, because we're looking for the professional input at that point.
So now, one of the things that I know people always get confused. This is zone A, B, LMNOP, X, Y, Z. I mean, how many zones are there in Milford? And what are they called? Because you see RA, RC,
Yeah, effectively, I'm not to get into each one of them, but there's residential zone, there's industrial zone, there's commercial zone, there's mixed use zone, the various points of that. You can go on the town website, you can bring up the map that shows where the boundaries for each one of those zones are, and it's spelled out right on the map.
So RA is residential, and it was the first zone, so it was A.
RA effectively is the zone that, if you look at the map, is the one closest to the downtown core. And as you move out, they usually get RB, RC, and RD.
Do you ever have disjointed RAs, or is it fixed?
There is you could have disjointed. I'm trying to think off the top of my head if that happens in Milford, but you can have that. The only thing that you can't do is you create it is effectively, and you've probably heard the term called spot zoning. You can't have an RA zone and then have this one parcel out here as RA.
Oh, have one house?
Yeah, that isn't, because again, that becomes your spot zoning situation. So you can have an RA zone here and an RA zone on the other side of town. There's no problem with that. But if somehow you created this thing that had this small
section. So the Calagione family can have their own little spot and call it something special.
Right.
Okay, that makes sense.
But other than that, it's... so
you have four major types of zones.
Yeah.
Right? You said residential, commercial, industrial, and mixed?
Yeah, well, there's a mixed use in terms of, like, we recently did the commercial residential zone on behind Main Street, effectively up in the Congress Street area, which tried to take into account trying to leave the funeral home businesses and make them conforming uses in a residential zone. So that's actually, there was some doctor's offices and things like that there. So we were looking to make sure that those stayed, and also for the opportunity for some people in some of those bigger houses to perhaps put in a commercial use downstairs and have residential upstairs, so that they'd look to, again, revitalize those buildings, keep them up, and again, for the town to be able to collect more taxes on those. So we did. So that's what I'm referring to as a mixed zone.
Now, from a practical point of view, if somebody comes in and says, I want to convert this lot or these 2-3 residential lots to commercial, there's a benefit to the town because the tax rate goes up 50% instantly. Mm-hmm. But the planning board, how do you decide whether or not you're comfortable with, changing it over?
Well, I mean, in 2 or 3 lots, unless it's in a commercial zone, you really can't do it. The first step would be, does it make sense to change the zoning of this area from residential to some other form? Commercial, highway commercial.
Because there was some land by the hospital that the hospital bought and they wanted changed.
The hospital is one of the other areas where we got into this mixed zone, because there was a lot of that type of usage where you had houses, residential uses, and you also had doctors and stuff. So that was actually the first area that we rezoned, was along that edge, because it made sense. That's what we were seeing as a usage, and we saw the need for that, so that we allowed that. But we didn't want people that were in residential houses to all of a sudden be non-conforming uses. They could stay there because they were grandfathered in, but it didn't make them non-conforming uses.
So that's why you make it a mixed.
Yeah, it allows for a, you still meet all the zoning requirements.
I'm still in my house that I've been in forever.
Yeah. And you could stay that way, but it it didn't allow you to make changes to that, because now if we didn't allow it to be a residence, if you wanted to make changes to that, you're in a commercial zone.
So if somebody bought my house to make it a doctor's office, they'd have to come to you.
If it was in the residential zone, they would have to try to change the zoning in order to be able to do that.
But if it's in a mixed zone,
If it's in a mixed zone, they may not even, well, they would have to come to us because it's a commercial use. There'd be a site plan involved. They would come to it, but in terms of its use, it's allowed by law. Now, it's allowed in that zone.
so now, Joe, how much flexibility if you sit there and say, okay, I'm going to come into the town, I'm going to build a commercial use building, and you hear about 1.3 or 1.7 parking places, per whatever. How do you gauge that? Because I'm always curious, because certain, a lawyer's office is going to have a bunch of different traffic pattern than a 7-Eleven.
Yeah, and the bylaw itself speaks to the requirements for parking for most generalized type of usages. So a 7-Eleven has one requirement where it's one number. A lawyer's office has a different requirement.
Okay,
for it.
so even though it's commercial,
it depends on the use down to some level. I mean, obviously it's not every possible level, and that's where you could get into some amount of issue as to whether you want to entertain.
a dentist is not going to be much different from an optometrist or something.
Right.
But I was wondering because realistically, you look at high traffic business. That's got to demand different requirements than a doctor's office that sees 4 people an hour.
Yeah, and the bylaw speaks to that. It's probably, time flies. It's probably been 8 or 9 years ago that we went through and changed our parking requirements again to try to update them to based on what we were seeing in the town. It's not an exact science. And you look at it and try to improve it as best you can. I mean, we've gone through various things with drive-throughs as to where they can place them because we've had issues. Same thing with parking. We run into issues now where due to the fact that most of Milford, 80% of Milford is in the Charles River Basin, we're going to run into issues with making sure that we minimize the amount of impervious surface in town. So we don't want a whole bunch of parking that's there so that people can go and find a parking spot on the weekend before Christmas and do that as your basis for 51 other weeks out of the year. That just doesn't make sense. So we're looking at, we've looked at and we'll continue to look at various ways to try to minimize the amount of parking, but certainly we don't want it to be inconvenient to people either. So that's an ongoing process. The amount of study that's done, again. Institute of Traffic Engineers publishes a book that's probably about that big that effectively looks at all different types of usages and how many parking spots per square foot, how many parking spots per restaurant seat or whatever you should have. What's the average? And that's used as a basis for some of the stuff that we come up with in terms of trying to change the bylaw or stuff as those are done. But the information every year is updated and stuff. So it's one of the things that you need to stay on top of, and every, be it every 5-10 years, you need to go back and look and say, is there something we can do better?
But now, take downtown. I mean, back in the old days, Paul Revere and I would leave Stacy, and you had to walk through Main Street so you could go to Grant's and get a bag of popcorn. That was the treat for the day. And downtown was alive. I mean, you keep hearing, Ronnie Pagnini's fighting like heck to try and bring life back in that group. And, my hat's off to them because they're really trying to make Milford vibrant again downtown. What can the planning board do?
Well, we've looked at, a number of years ago, I brought forth a proposal that wasn't successful at town meeting to allow for residential usage upstairs. There were various issues as to why that wasn't accepted. Town didn't, had certain concerns. The planning board didn't, but that was certainly one of the things that we felt would help, because again, it's a change in you go through time. If you look at the 60s and 70s and into the 80s, there was the thought process that you needed to separate commercial and residential.
Right.
Now you look at that, and most urban planners will tell you that to have a vibrant commercial area,
need
you need
people
the residents down there. So now, again, we set up the zoning that didn't allow that, and now we're looking at trying to bring that back. It's not going to be a leap. It's going to be small baby steps to get there.
But what was the big I mean, let's face it, at least from outward appearances, and I may be ignorant, but it seems like the upper floors of downtown Milford are, I won't say dead, but on quiet terms. So making use of them, what would be the negative? Is it traffic? Is it parking?
Well, I going back to that town meeting, I believe that the town meeting felt that there was issues with parking, issues with rubbish, that were the main reasons that it wasn't approved back then. The new bylaw that was just approved at town meeting loosens that up to some extent. I don't know whether people are going to take advantage of that or not. You talked about the planning board, seems to always give. I was one that actually voted against that. And I didn't vote against it because of the context of trying to get mixed use downtown. I've been a proponent of that from day one. I'm just not sure that is the proposal that will get it done, but I think the general context is a good one, to go to the mixed use. But maybe it will, and so it allows for it at least. In the downtown core, that one keeps commercial on the first floor and allows for residential up above.
So that is available today?
That will be available shortly. It had every zoning amendment that's passed by town meeting has to go to the state, has to go to the Attorney General's office, and has to be approved. It has to be accepted.
But how many are ever overturned?
There's probably been, in my 18 years, I think one came back for something.
I was going to say, you would hope that Larry and the 5 planning board members with, virtually no experience, only 18 years, would know what is legit and what isn't.
Yeah, I forget what, it comes down to legalese that are probably beyond most of us in the planning board.
Probably
and even
the
Larry.
words that we use, not the intent.
Yeah.
Because I would think it would give us a built-in, if I'm young or old, I can't imagine people with multi-children want to be right downtown, but, when we lived in Paris, it was just so easy to walk out of the apartment and go eat at the restaurants in the neighborhood.
Yep. Yeah.
So they had a built-in population to feed the businesses.
Right. Yeah, and that was one of my issues. The bylaw as it's written right now is 55 or older only.
Ah.
That was one of the issues as to whether that was correct or not, whether we should have that or not. I wasn't convinced that we should do that.
I'm curious to say, if I'm 20-some years old and I want to live in an apartment, I don't know that there's a lot of real apartments in Milford that are open. It seems like everything is full.
Yep.
And the rent seems ridiculous. So why would I not want a millennial or a 20-some-year-old living downtown?
You're somewhat asking the wrong person, because I wasn't the one that said that or not. I can tell you what was said to us.
Sure.
in that the proponent and felt that, and I think this had gone before the Board of Selectmen also. There was a feeling that this was the proper first step. We can always change it later on and open it up to everybody.
Let's go
but
baby steps.
Let's start with this. Again, I'm not sure that I'm of that ilk, but like I said, I wasn't adverse to the concept. I was adverse to some of the things that were in it, but so if we need to go baby steps, at least that gets us going.
I could see it in the old days when the first time I had to pay a mortgage or rent was $240 a month, $249.
Yeah.
You're kind of limited as to what you can do. But today, I'm seeing people tell me that they're paying $1,300 a month.
Yeah. That's
holy moly.
Yeah. But I think, and I was looking at it in terms of the biggest employer in the town of Milford is the hospital. Having a spot, having an apartment downtown that you can get on, the little bus, because to be honest, the little bus can't get you to a lot of places without spending a lot of time, but that was almost a perfect, I can go here, go up there, and go to work. And a lot of days I can walk, and those people aren't 55 and older that are going to be doing that. So that was one of the issues why I thought it would be appropriate to have it open to everybody. But we'll see where that goes, and hopefully it can be tweaked as we go forward.
You think about the trend. I mean, when we grew up, the Little Red Hospital, the Little Red building that could actually did. Today, when I think of, God, I'm dating myself, Dwyer's Sportland, Mary Papillion and the bowling alley.
Yeah.
I mean, all those areas, the laundromat, then now medical centers.
Right.
And it's beautiful. I mean, even downtown.
Yeah.
For a while out by Dunkin' Donuts, it wasn't the most pleasant impression you got when you drove. Now you look at it and more medical. It looks gorgeous.
Yeah. I mean, people have said things. I look at downtown in general context, and I remember when downtown wasn't in that good a shape. But in general, downtown isn't in bad shape. Most of the buildings are well kept. The first floors are predominantly full. You may not like the usage, but again, that's nobody's. There's nothing that we can command to say you need to provide this type of usage in there. That's up to the people that are willing to rent them or willing to.
Yeah, I've got X parking places, and I conform to the zoning bylaw.
Yep.
Leave me alone.
But in general, I don't have an issue with downtown in that sense. I have an issue that, again, as you said, a lot of the upper floors aren't used for anything, and that's where we need to go, and one of the areas that we need to look at to try to improve as we move forward. But the commercial space has been taken up quite a bit, and it's tough to, we've actually done a very good job of that. It's nothing to sneeze at because, again, it's not as convenient as a doctor's office or a dentist's office that has 30 spaces right out in front of it. I think there's parking available in the downtown core, but you got to go looking for it.
Well, we bought the 3 properties, essentially hoping to expand parking right there.
Yeah. Yeah, that will, but I think there's parking, the old Stop and Shop, going back, I guess, dating myself. I think that parking lot, there's usually parking spaces available during the day out there, but you got to go looking for them. Again, you can't, you go by Main Street and all the parking spaces are filled.
Funny you say I keep getting yelled at by my darling bride and kids when I refer to Iron Doleys.
Yeah.
It's like, no, okay, it's Shaw's, but to me, I grew up in the Heights. It's always going to be Iron Doleys.
Yep. Yeah.
Now, as we look, and you say the planning board's vision, is there any special areas or special actions that the planning board is hoping to take to help Milford grow?
Well, when we originally, and it becomes, you've got to weigh certain things. We've, as I said, we've done various things along the way. I had sort of hoped that we would be able to craft the downtown usage bill somewhat, or the change somewhat differently. To do that would have taken probably most of this year to get through, because there's a lot of things that I believe need to be thought about when you do something like that. We've recently did the business park zone. We've looked at continuing the mixed-use residential, commercial usage along Main Street as to whether we should extend that or not. So those are the types of things that we have looked at. We'll continue to look at.
But where would you extend it, Joe?
We're effectively going up further on Congress Street. We've taken steps along.
Congress.
Yeah.
Because I was thinking Main Street.
No, Main Street.
You're done.
Yeah. No, Main Street. We're looking at the buildings behind and how far up as we go towards Town Park. How far up you go. We've done the section down at the hospital. We've gone part of the way up. As we move further, whether we should go further or not with that zone.
You mean past the funeral homes?
We probably would never get past. I don't believe we're up to the funeral home right now, if I remember correctly where we went. So we'd be going up to that point. We probably would never get past the school's town park section. As you get up past that, most of those are. There are some. You could consider Walnut Street going up to there, because then after that point they're all residential.
It's all houses.
Yeah, but there are some usages, I think, in there that have swayed between having some form downstairs.
Wouldn't it be practically impossible? If I think of across from Town Park, if I want to put a business there, I can't just buy a house because that house has 2 parking places. I'd almost have to buy 2 lots and level one, or right?
Some of them actually have significant backyard areas where you could put parking in.
Okay.
So there is the possibility of doing that, and most of the usage that we're trying to promote in there are small parking usage type thing, a doctor's office, a dentist's office. We're not looking
Not
at
a
that's not a
7-Eleven.
7-Eleven. No, that can't go into those zones. That isn't what's allowed in
Now,
those
you
zones.
also mentioned drive-throughs. I know there's towns around us that have this fear of the drive-throughs. What's the issue? I mean, I love the fact that when I come here, I drive over, get my Dunkin' Donuts cup, and come over.
Yeah,
I don't have to get out of the car, especially if it's raining or. So, what's the big issue with drive-throughs?
Well, the biggest issue is the fact that so many people like to do what you do, that and when the line is 7 or 8 cars long, they're out into Main Street on the Dunkin' Donuts, and at one point in time, if you remember, in Dunkin' Donuts, to their credit, actually came to us and said, we want to change, and they actually pushed the drive-through back further, which helped. But in the morning, and I usually don't go down that way, but there are once in a while I'll drive out that way. And if you go in the morning at a high time, I've seen people trying to turn in, and they're stuck in, they're stopping Main Street traffic. That's the problem with drive-throughs, is that the amount of space that you need to supply cars to stay there is large, and we try to monitor that, and we've changed the bylaw in terms of the requirements from the ordering station to how many cars can go behind it. We've increased that along the way because you end up with people being in the way of everybody. So that the newest one, and we'll see how it works. Again, some of it's trial by fire, but the new one at Starbucks effectively takes everybody to the back of the building. So they're not in a drive aisle of people even parking within the Stop and Shop Plaza, and it's quite long. If that one backs up, I don't know where we go. But we've made changes along the way, and we're very cognizant. I believe and this is going this isn't going back that far, but I'm trying to think the site plan review meeting. I think we requested that the owner move the location of the pay station so that we could maximize that space as much as possible.
Again, I had no idea all these things came before the planning board.
Yep.
So to you and the 4 others, thank you for all you do. We really appreciate it, and thank you for helping Milford grow in the right direction.
Thank you.
And as always, to our 6 loyal viewers, and maybe a couple extra from the planning board for this show, may God bless, may tomorrow be a better day than today, and thank you for joining us. We have to wait 30 seconds.
Not too long since I've been home.